My brother filed an amendment to our operating agreement that he dated 4 months earlier than he actually sent it. And he did it because the company had just crossed a valuation that made my $2,800,000 stake worth fighting for. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. My brother and I grew up in a house where I was the one who fixed things and he was the one who broke them. And our parents always told me that was just how we were wired. He was the youngest. He was charming. He could talk our father out of a punishment in under 2 minutes, and I watched him do it more times than I can count. I was the older sister, the one who carried the laundry baskets up the stairs, the one who learned how to balance a checkbook at 14 because nobody else in the house wanted to. I was 9 years old when I figured out that being responsible was not the same thing as being loved, and I think part of me has been quiet about that ever since. When I built my company, I did it alone. I signed every lease. I drove to every supplier meeting in a used Honda with a cracked dashboard. I ate cereal for dinner 3 nights a week for almost 2 years. And when my brother came to me 18 months in and asked if there was a way he could help, I gave him 30% as a silent partner because our mother was still alive then, and she asked me to. I have a folder in the bottom drawer of my desk with every receipt, every signed page, every email he ever sent me about the business. I kept that folder because something in me already knew. I just didn't want to be right. If you have ever been the one who carried the family burden while someone else took the credit, stay with me. And if this story speaks to you, subscribe to my channel for more stories like this, because family truth has a way of coming back. The boutique started in a 600 square foot space behind a coffee shop in a part of town nobody wanted to be in yet. I signed the lease on a Tuesday in March, and I remember the landlord asking if I was sure, because the previous tenant had gone out of business in 8 months. I told him I was sure. I wasn't. But I had been working for somebody else for 15 years, and I had reached the point where the only thing scarier than failing was waking up another Monday and walking into a building with somebody else's name on it. My name is Clara. I'm 53 years old. I have one brother, Daniel, who is 7 years younger than me. We grew up in a small house in a small town, and the only thing our parents had to leave us was the house itself and whatever I built with my own hands. The first year was ugly. I sold inventory out of my car at craft fairs. I wrote my own copy. I took photographs with a phone that was already 2 generations old. I learned how to read a profit and loss statement by watching YouTube videos at 1 a.m. with the volume turned down so I wouldn't wake my husband. By the end of year 2, the boutique had a real storefront, a real website, and 3 part-time employees. By the end of year 3, we were doing volume I would not have believed if you'd told me about it the morning I signed that lease. That was when Daniel called. He said our mother had asked him to call. He said she had been worrying about him, about whether he was going to be okay, about whether he had something steady. He said he wasn't asking for a job. He just wanted to be involved in something that mattered to the family. He said it would mean a lot to her if I could find a way to include him. I want you to understand the position I was in. Our mother was 78 years old. She had been quietly slipping for about a year, and the doctor had used the word dementia for the first time 3 weeks before that phone call. I had been driving 40 minutes each way every other weekend to check on her. Daniel had been to her house twice in the same period, but when she asked me about him, her face would light up the way it never did when she asked about me. And I had spent 50 years trying to make that face light up for me, and I had finally accepted that it never would. So I said yes. I had my attorney draft an operating agreement. Daniel got 30% as a silent partner. He had no operational role. He had no day-to-day involvement. He had the voting rights the original agreement laid out, which were limited and specific, and the agreement included a clause that I want you to remember, because it's the clause that saved my life 18 months later. The clause said that any change to the ownership structure of the company required the unanimous written consent of all members. Unanimous, written, all members. My attorney had drafted that clause into every operating agreement she'd ever written for me, because she knew me and she knew my family, even if she'd never met them. Daniel signed it without reading it. I remember that. He sat across from me at the kitchen table in our mother's house, and he picked up the pen and he didn't even turn past the signature page. He looked up at me and he said, "I trust you, Clara." And I felt sick because I knew he didn't trust me. He just didn't think the paper mattered. That was the first time I saw the old pattern in a new form. I want to back up for a minute because I think you need to know what the old pattern was, or none of the rest of this is going to land the way it should. When Daniel was 8 years old and I was 15, our father took a second job. He worked nights at a warehouse, and he came home in the morning when the rest of us were leaving for school. Our mother had a part-time job at the church office, and she worked Tuesdays and Thursdays. That left a lot of afternoons where the two of us were home alone, and a lot of weekends where I was watching him while she ran errands. I was the one who made his lunches. I was the one who walked him to the bus stop. I was the one who did his laundry because she was tired and because somebody had to. I did not resent it then. I am old enough now to know that you do not resent things while they are happening. You resent them later when you finally have the time and the language to look back. When Daniel was 12, he stole $40 from my babysitting jar. I had been saving for a class trip. I asked him about it. He cried. He said he had needed it for a school book and that he would pay me back. He never paid me back. Our mother told me to let it go because he was the youngest and because he had not really meant to keep it. I let it go. I had to skip the class trip. Nobody mentioned it again. When Daniel was 19, he wrecked our father's car. He had taken it without asking. The insurance covered most of it, but there was a deductible, and there was a tow bill, and there was a small body shop that had to be paid in cash. Our father came to me. He asked if I could help. I had been working full-time for 2 years by then, and I had a small savings account. I wrote a check for $1,100. Our father said he would pay me back when he could. He did, eventually, in installments, over 4 years. Daniel never paid anybody back for anything, but at our mother's birthday dinner that year, she told the whole table that Daniel had really turned things around, and she made him stand up so we could clap for him. I clapped. I clapped because that is what you do. When Daniel was 28, he asked our mother to co-sign a lease on an apartment. She did. He did not pay rent for the last 3 months he lived there, and the property management company came after her, and she paid them out of her retirement savings without telling our father. I only found out about it because she mentioned it to me, almost in passing, while I was driving her home from a doctor's appointment 6 years later. She said, "Don't tell your father. He would be upset." I did not tell my father. I drove home that night, and I wrote the amount down in the back of the same planner I had been writing things down in since I was 12. That is the pattern. That is what I mean when I say I had been keeping records on him my whole life. The records were not for a courtroom. The records were for me because nobody else in the family was going to keep them. And because I had figured out by the time I was a teenager that the only way to know what had actually happened in a family like ours was to write it down before somebody started telling a softer version of it later. For the next year, Daniel was exactly what I had asked him to be. Silent. He didn't come to the store. He didn't email me about inventory. He cashed his quarterly distribution checks, and he sent our mother flowers on her birthday, and he posted occasional photographs of himself on a boat that was not his. I didn't ask whose boat it was. I didn't want to know. Then, in the spring of the 18th month, 3 things happened in a row, and I want to walk you through them slowly, because this is where it starts. The first thing was a phone call. Daniel called me on a Sunday afternoon, which was unusual because he didn't usually call me on weekends. He asked how the business was doing. I told him fine. He asked about the spring numbers. I told him fine. He asked in a very specific way what our projected revenue was for the next 2 quarters and whether we were on track to cross a particular threshold he named. He named the number. He named it accurately. And the formal business review, the one where partners get the official numbers in writing, was not scheduled for another 3 months. I asked him where he had heard that figure. He laughed and said our accountant had mentioned it at a family dinner. We did not have a family accountant. We had a company accountant, and that accountant had not been to a family dinner in his life. I let it go. I don't know why. Maybe because our mother had been admitted to memory care 3 weeks before, and I didn't have the bandwidth to fight a phantom. Maybe because part of me still wanted to believe he was just curious. That was red flag 1. I wrote it down in the back of my planner that night in pencil, and I drew a small circle around it. I had been keeping notes about Daniel since I was 12 years old. I never stopped. The second thing happened about 6 weeks later. I was on LinkedIn on a Wednesday morning drinking coffee in my kitchen before driving to the store, and an update came across my feed. Daniel had retained an attorney. He had posted about it. He had used the phrase exciting new chapter and tagged the law firm. The firm specialized in business disputes. It was a firm I knew because I had considered them once and decided against them. He had not told me. He had not told our mother, who probably wouldn't have understood anyway. He had not told anyone in the family. I sat in my kitchen and I read that post 3 times. The receipt had my name on it. The story had his. I called my own attorney that afternoon. Her name is Miriam, and she has been my attorney for 12 years, and the first thing she said when I told her was, "Clara, pull the operating agreement out of your safe and read me the unanimous consent clause." I read it to her over the phone. She listened. She said, "Good, don't do anything yet. Don't say anything to him. Just keep watching." So I kept watching. That was red flag 2. The third thing was the smallest thing, and it was the one that made my hands shake. On a Tuesday in late summer, a letter arrived from the registered agent for the LLC. The registered agent is a service that handles official filings and notifications for the company, and they sent me what they called a courtesy notification. The letter said an amendment filing was incoming. It did not say what the amendment was. It did not say who had submitted it. It just said that something had been filed and that I would receive a copy in the standard processing window. The letter arrived on Tuesday. I did not say anything to anyone except Miriam. I called her, I read her the notification, and she told me to wait. On Thursday, Daniel sent me a text message. It said, "Hey, did you get anything in the mail lately? Just curious." That was the entire message. 3 sentences, lowercase, as if he were asking about a magazine subscription. I stood in my kitchen and I read that text, and I felt something inside me go very still and very cold. I had been keeping records on him since I was 12. I had been keeping records on him as a business partner since the day he signed the operating agreement. I had a folder in the bottom drawer of my desk, and the folder was thick. And he had just walked into a trap that he didn't know was a trap because he had decided that I wasn't paying attention. That was red flag 3. I did not text him back for 2 days. When I finally did, I said, "Just bills, mostly. Why?" He didn't answer. He never answered. Some siblings do not want fairness. They want revision. The amendment arrived 8 days after the courtesy notification. I will tell you exactly what it said, because the details matter. The amendment claimed to reclassify Daniel's 30% interest from a silent partnership stake to what the document called a managing member stake. The reclassification, if accepted, would have triggered a vote on management control of the company. Under the amended structure, the vote would have been weighted in a way that I would have lost. The amended structure would have given Daniel the authority to appoint a co-manager, to require quarterly approvals on operational decisions, and most importantly, to force a buyout structure that would have valued my interest at a number significantly below what it was actually worth. But here is the part that I had to read 3 times, because at first I didn't believe what I was looking at. The amendment was dated 4 months earlier than it had been delivered. I sat at my desk with the amendment in one hand and my own calendar in the other. I had been keeping a paper calendar for 30 years. I had every meeting, every deposit, every conversation logged. The date Daniel had typed onto the amendment was a date that fell, by my own records, before the company had crossed the revenue milestone that made the 30% interest worth what it was now worth. He had backdated the document to a point in time when the stake was worth considerably less, in case there was any future question about valuation, intent, or timing. He had not just tried to take more. He had tried to rewrite when he had decided to take more. I want to tell you what I did next, but first I want to tell you what I did not do. I did not call him. I did not call our father. I did not call our mother, who would not have understood. I did not post on social media. I did not write him a furious email at 2 a.m. and then delete it in the morning, the way I had done 7 different times during the years he was growing up. I sat at my desk in the back of the boutique with the amendment open in front of me, and I opened the bottom drawer, and I pulled out the folder. The folder was beige, and it was thick, and it had Daniel's name on the tab in my own handwriting from 12 years earlier. Inside the folder was every receipt, every email, every signed page, every canceled check, every text message I had screenshotted and printed because something in my gut told me to print it. There were notes I had written to myself. There were copies of the original operating agreement with the unanimous consent clause underlined in green pen. There were copies of his quarterly distribution checks, all of which he had cashed without complaint. There was a sympathy card he had sent our mother 3 years earlier, in which he had thanked her for raising him and had written in his own handwriting that he had always known the family business was Clara's and that he was grateful to be even a small part of it. I sat with that folder for a long time. I did not open my laptop. I did not call Miriam. I did not move. The store was closed. The lights were low. My phone was face down on the desk. I sat with it the way you sit with the body of someone you used to love, knowing that what comes next will be paperwork and not feeling. I did not argue about memory. I brought records. The next morning, I called Miriam, and I told her what I had found. She did not raise her voice. She rarely does. She said, "Clara, I'm going to need 3 things from you. I'm going to need the original operating agreement, the courtesy notification from the registered agent, and the amendment itself. I'm also going to need you to send me your calendar entries for the 4 months around the date Daniel typed onto that amendment. And then I want you to do nothing. Do not call him. Do not respond to any of his messages. Do not engage. Let me handle it." I asked her what she was going to do. She said, "I'm going to subpoena the registered agent for the delivery records. We're going to compare the date the amendment was actually received against the date he typed onto the document. And then we're going to file a written objection citing the unanimous consent clause." I asked her if it would work. She said, "Clara, your original operating agreement is one of the cleanest pieces of paper I have ever drafted. I drafted that clause for a reason. I drafted it for this exact reason. I want to tell you about the next 6 weeks, because the next 6 weeks were the hardest 6 weeks of my adult life, and they were hard in a way I did not expect. Daniel did not know what was happening. He did not know that Miriam had subpoenaed the registered agent. He did not know that the delivery records had come back showing exactly what we expected them to show. He did not know that a written objection had already been filed. What he knew was that the amendment had not been accepted yet, and that he had not heard from me, and so he started doing what he had always done, which was to circle back and try to find another angle. He called me on a Sunday. I let it go to voicemail. He called me again on a Monday. I let it go to voicemail. He called our father, who was 81 years old and lived alone now that our mother was in memory care, and he told our father that I had been difficult about the business and that he was worried about me. My father called me crying. He was crying because he didn't know what was true and what wasn't anymore, and he had spent his whole life trying to keep his children from fighting, and he was tired. He asked me what was going on. I told him I would explain it when I had the answers in writing. I told him I loved him. I told him not to talk to Daniel about it again until I called him back. My father said, "Clara, your mother always told me you were the strong one, and I always thought she was being unfair to your brother. I'm starting to think she was just telling the truth." I drove home from that phone call, and I parked in my driveway, and I cried for 45 minutes without getting out of the car. I cried because I had been waiting for someone in my family to say that to me for almost 50 years, and the only person who had ever said it was an 81-year-old man who was about to lose his wife. The caregiver's log was dated. The lies were not. 3 days later, Daniel showed up at the boutique. He showed up at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday when he knew I would be there alone before the afternoon shift came in. He was wearing a sport coat that didn't fit right, and he was carrying a folder of his own. His folder was thin, mine was thick. He stood in the middle of the showroom, between the front display and the register, and he said, "Clara, I think we need to talk before this gets out of hand." I said, "It's already out of hand. You backdated a document." He laughed. It was the same laugh he had used at 14 years old when our mother caught him with $20 from her purse. He said, "Clara, that's a misunderstanding. The date on the amendment is the date I started working on it. That's pretty standard." I did not respond. I had learned by then that the silence was more useful than the argument. He said, "Look, You and I both know the business is doing well. I'm not asking for everything. I'm asking for a fair structure. I have an attorney, and he says the original agreement is outdated. I said, the original agreement has a clause. He said, clauses can be amended. I said, by unanimous written consent. He went very quiet. I watched his face. I had watched that face since the day he was born, and I had seen it do many things, but I had never seen it do what it did right then. He looked for the first time in his life as if he had genuinely not thought of something. He had skipped past that clause. He had skipped past it the way he had skipped past every page of the agreement he signed at our mother's kitchen table 18 months earlier. He said, Clara, you're my sister. I said, I know. That's why this hurts so much. He left without his folder. He left it on the counter. I picked it up after he walked out, and I carried it to the back office, and I put it on top of the beige folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. I did not open it. I did not need to. Some siblings do not want fairness, they want revision. The mediation was scheduled for a Friday morning in October. The leaves had started turning. I drove to the conference room downtown in the same used Honda I had bought 10 years earlier when the boutique was still being run out of my car, because I had never replaced it, and because some part of me wanted to walk into that room as the same woman who had signed the lease on a Tuesday in March in a part of town nobody had wanted to be in yet. Miriam met me in the lobby. She was wearing a charcoal suit, and she was carrying 2 binders. The first binder had the original operating agreement, the courtesy notification from the registered agent, the amendment Daniel had filed, the delivery records from the subpoena, and a written timeline that lined up every date side by side. The second binder had photocopies of every relevant page, tabbed and color-coded in case anyone wanted to take a copy home. She was not the kind of attorney who left anything to chance. Daniel was already in the conference room when we walked in. He was sitting on the far side of the long table next to his own attorney. His attorney was a man in his early 60s with white hair and a tired face, and the moment I walked in, the attorney looked at me the way somebody looks at you when they have already realized they are on the wrong side of the paperwork. Daniel was holding a copy of the amendment in his hands. He was holding it the way a person holds something they no longer believe will help them. The mediator was a woman named Patricia. She was about my age. She had a calm, even voice, and she spent the first 10 minutes laying out the structure of the meeting. She said this was not a trial. She said this was an opportunity for both sides to present their positions and to come to a resolution that the registered agent could record. She said she had reviewed the documents in advance. She turned to Miriam first. Miriam stood up. She did not raise her voice. She opened the first binder, and she walked Patricia through the timeline. The original operating agreement signed on a date that everyone could verify. The unanimous consent clause on page 4. The courtesy notification from the registered agent. The amendment with the date Daniel had typed onto it. And then the delivery records from the subpoena, which showed in plain text that the amendment had been delivered to the registered agent 4 months after the date Daniel had typed onto it. Patricia looked at the timeline for a long time. She did not look up at Daniel. She did not look up at me. She looked at the paperwork. Then she did the thing I will remember for the rest of my life. She picked up the original operating agreement, and she turned to page 4, and she read the unanimous consent clause aloud. She read it slowly. She read it without inflection. She read every word. She said, any change to the ownership structure of the company shall require the unanimous written consent of all members. And then she put the agreement down on the table, and she looked at Daniel, and she said, Sir, do you have written consent from Clara for this amendment? Daniel did not answer. His attorney did not answer. The room was very quiet. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I could hear Patricia's pen click against the table when she set it down. I could hear my own breath, in and out, slow. Patricia waited. She waited a long time. Then she said, I'm going to take that as a no. She turned to Miriam. She said, I'm satisfied that the amendment fails to meet the requirements set out in the original operating agreement. The amendment is void. Clara's 30% interest and her ownership and management of the company are confirmed as they were under the original agreement. There will be no buyout obligation, and there will be no further proceedings on this matter. It was over in 9 minutes. Daniel did not look at me. He gathered his papers. He put the amendment back into a manila envelope. He stood up and he walked out of the conference room ahead of his attorney, and he did not say goodbye to me, and I did not say goodbye to him. Miriam and I stayed in the room for another 20 minutes, signing paperwork with Patricia. When we walked out, the lobby was empty. Daniel was gone. His attorney was gone. The whole thing had taken less than half an hour. I drove home that afternoon, and I sat in my driveway again, and this time I did not cry. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, and I looked at my house, and I thought about my mother, who would not have been able to understand what had happened that morning, even if I had been able to tell her. I thought about my father, who I would have to call that night, and tell, and try to comfort. I thought about the boutique, which was still standing, still mine, still the thing I had built with my own hands, and I thought about Daniel. I want to tell you about one thing that happened between the mediation and the funeral, before I tell you what happened to him, because I keep coming back to it, and I think it matters more than the rest of it put together. About 3 weeks after the conference room, I drove to the memory care facility to visit our mother. It was a Sunday afternoon. The facility had a small garden out back, with a bench and a couple of bird feeders, and on warm days, they would let the residents sit out there for a while. I sat with her on the bench. She did not know who I was that day. She thought I was a nurse from a hospital where she had once had surgery 20 years earlier. I let her think it. I held her hand. I did not correct her. She started talking about her children. She did this sometimes when she was confused. She would talk about us as if we were small. She told me that afternoon that she had a daughter who was very serious and a son who was very funny, and that she had always wished she had been a better mother to the daughter because the daughter had needed more from her than she had known how to give. She said it the way a person says a thing they have been carrying for a long time. She said, "I think she is angry with me. I think she has reasons." I sat on the bench and I held my mother's hand, and I did not tell her that I was the daughter. I did not tell her that I had just been through the worst 8 weeks of my adult life, and that her son had tried to take 20 years of my work, and that I had won, but that the winning did not feel like winning. I let her talk. I let her say the things she had not been able to say to me when she still knew who I was. When the nurse came to bring her back inside, she squeezed my hand. She said, "Tell her I am sorry if you ever see her." I said, "I will tell her." I sat on that bench for another half an hour after they took her in. I was crying, but I was also, in some small way, lighter, because I had heard it. Even from the wrong version of her, in the wrong moment, in a memory care garden in late October, I had heard it. And I had been waiting 50 years. Daniel did not lose anything legally. He still had his 30% silent stake. He still got his quarterly distributions. The amendment was void, but his original position was intact. He was, on paper, no worse off than he had been before he tried what he tried. But he lost the family. Our father did not speak to him for almost a year. When they finally talked again, it was at our mother's funeral, which came 8 months after the mediation. They spoke for about 10 minutes by the buffet table. I watched them from across the room. I was not invited into the conversation, and I did not try to join it. Daniel did not approach me at the funeral. He sat on the far side of the church. When the service was over, he hugged our father, and he nodded at me from across the parking lot, and he got into a rental car and drove away. I have not seen him in person since. He sent me a Christmas card the year after the funeral. The card had a picture of his family on it. There was a handwritten note inside that said, "I hope you're doing well. I think about you. I don't know how to fix this." I read it twice. I put it in the bottom drawer of my desk in the same beige folder because I did not know what else to do with it. I did not write back. I want you to understand what the ending of this story has been like, because I think a lot of people, when they hear a story like this one, expect there to be a moment of victory. There has not been a moment of victory. There has been a moment of legal correctness, which is not the same thing. I have a company that I still own. I have a 30% silent partner who does not speak to me. I have a father who is now widowed and who lives alone and who calls me twice a week and who has, in the last 18 months, started to say things to me that he never said when our mother was alive. He told me on a Tuesday afternoon in February that he was sorry. He said he was sorry that he had not seen what was happening between his children for so long. He said he was sorry that he had spent 50 years thinking I was the strong one and Daniel was the one who needed protecting, when the truth was that I had been the one who needed protecting all along, and Daniel had been the one who had been allowed to keep taking. He cried on the phone. I cried on the phone. I sat at my desk in the back of the boutique with the bottom drawer open, and I stared at the beige folder, and I cried with my father for the first time in my entire life. He said, "Clara, your mother loved you. She did not know how to show it. She came from a family where the boys got the love and the girls got the work, and she did not know there was another way." I said, "I know, Dad. I know." He said, "I should have known better. I should have done more." I said, "I love you. It's all right. It's all right now." It was not all right, but it was true that I loved him, and it was true that I was finally able to say so out loud, and that was as close to all right as anything was going to get. I keep the folder. I am going to keep it forever. The folder is not a trophy. The folder is a record. It is the record of a sister who learned how to write things down before she learned how to ride a bike, because she figured out very early that words on paper were the only thing in her family that could not be twisted later by somebody who needed the story to come out differently. It is the record of a woman who built a company alone, who gave away 30% of it for love, and who learned 18 months later that love is not the same as paperwork, and that paperwork is not the same as protection unless somebody bothers to read it. I am 53 years old. I run a company that is worth more now than it was the day Daniel filed his amendment. I have a father who finally sees me. I have a husband who has watched me cry in our driveway more times than I would like to admit. I have employees who have been with me for years, who do not know any of this story and who do not need to. I have a brother I do not speak to. I am, in the simplest possible terms, finally free. Free of the wondering, free of the waiting, free of the small voice in the back of my head that used to ask every quarter whether this would be the quarter Daniel would try something. He tried something and it failed, and now I know. I will tell you the last thing, and then I will let you go. About a month after the mediation, I was cleaning out our mother's house. She was still alive then, in memory care. But she was not coming home, and we needed to start sorting through her things. I was in her bedroom, going through the drawers in the small writing desk where she had kept her correspondence for 60 years, and I found a notebook. The notebook was small, and it was bound in faded blue cloth, and it had her handwriting on the cover, and the cover said, in her own pen, "About my children." I sat down on the edge of her bed, and I opened it. The notebook was almost empty. There were maybe 10 pages of writing, spread out over 30 years. Most of them were dated. The last entry was from about 2 years before her diagnosis. It said, in her handwriting, "Clara took me to the doctor again today. She made me lunch afterward. I am ashamed of myself for the way I have treated her. I do not know how to start over. I do not think I have time." I sat on the edge of my mother's bed, and I read that page, and I cried in a way I had not cried since I was a child. She had known. She had known the whole time. She had not been able to say it to me. She had not been able to fix it. But she had known, and she had written it down, and she had left the notebook in a drawer where she must have known I would eventually find it, because I was the one who would clean out the desk. Of course I was. I had always been the one. I put the notebook in the beige folder in the bottom drawer of my desk, with the operating agreement and the courtesy notification and the void amendment and the unread Christmas card. The folder is heavier now. It holds more than just the business. It holds the whole family, the way the family really was, written down by the people who lived it. I did not argue about memory. I brought records. If you have been the sibling who built the thing, who carried the parents, who kept the receipts while somebody else kept the smile, I want you to hear me. The paperwork is not cold. The paperwork is the only thing some of us have ever had that told the truth on our behalf when nobody else would. Keep your records. Keep your folder. Keep the receipts, the calendars, the cards, the notes in the back of your planner from when you were 12. Keep all of it. Not because you are paranoid, because you are paying attention, because somebody in the family has to. And if it ever comes to a conference room and a mediator with a calm voice and a brother across the table holding a piece of paper he can no longer use, you will sit down and you will open the binder and you will let the record speak. That is what I did. That is what I would do again. That is the story. And if stories like this remind you that blood does not excuse betrayal, subscribe to my channel for more stories. Because sometimes peace begins when the truth is finally spoken.